Hey everybody, welcome back to US History. So this is our next section of notes. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So today we're really talking about the beginnings of the Great Depression. So we have to start with who was in office, that being Herbert Hoover. Now he was elected in 1928, and the previous Republican presidents Calvin Coolidge and Warren Harding had ushered in a period of economic prosperity during the 20s. Even though it was more perceived than real, and most Americans believed Hoover would keep the good times rolling. That's not the case, though. The stock market decided to crash, but before we get to that, we need to talk about some economic terms that you need to know. So, gains in the stock market had attracted a lot of new investors during the 20s, and these many investors were really wealthy. And middle class Americans wanted to be involved in this as well. So they started to do something known as buying on margin or taking out loans to buy stock. Now, this can only be paid back if the prices kept rising. And if they don't, well, you're really in trouble and you lost all your money, including the money you borrowed. Now, some people would take part in what is known as speculation investment. Now, this is a chance of a quick profit, completely ignoring the risks. Now, with so many people being involved in the market, these prices became artificially inflated. And because stock prices are based on loans, not solid cash investments. So these companies didn't have this amount of money that they said was invested in their company. It was more so a loan that they had to pay back to their investors. So the prelude. By 1929, some economists had warned of trouble. And the growing wealth was in the hands of the few super rich, and many Americans were living on credit and piling up debt that they couldn't pay off. The best way to explain the economic cycle is like a wave. Now, you may have talked about this in science class, but as you can see, the economic cycle is just like a wave. You have your high points and your low points. During the height of the 1920s, so when Coolidge and Harding were in office, we're up here towards the top of one of these crests. By the end of today's lecture, we'll be down here at the bottom. And this is a reflective cycle of how the economy works. So, by September, the stock prices had started to drop, and investors had realized the market had been inflated with borrowed money. This imaginary prosperity was exposed and gone practically overnight. And with everybody realizing that it was inflated with borrowed money, people began to panic. And this all came to a head on October 29th, 1929, also known as Black Tuesday. Panicking investors tried to sell off all their stocks, and realistically, the stock market plummeted overnight. And companies collapsed because all this money was being taken away from them again, and they didn't have enough to even pay wages for their workers. So people started to get laid off too. Now, financial collapse, not just the stock market took the brunt of the depression, it also hit the banking system in the United States. Mainly because most banks invested in the stock market, and they didn't have money to cover consumer accounts. Unlike today, where there's legal protection and insurance to cover the money in your account, that didn't exist back then. So people went on these things known as bank runs, attempts to get all their money out. And for some, they got all their money back. But once the bank was out of money, sorry, your savings are gone. There was no safety net. So when the bank closed, there was no way to recover your money that was still in your account. It may have said you had X amount of dollars on paper, but in reality, you didn't have that money there. Now, this resulted in an expansion of a global depression. Now, businesses failed because no one was buying. Nobody had money. Huge employers like railroads and automakers couldn't survive. Many businesses went bankrupt, and millions lost their jobs. Many European nations also went into a depression around the same time due to the effects of World War I and the collapse of American industry as well, because they couldn't buy American goods. As those factories were closing down, that was less and less goods that were being sent to them. Now, here's some statistics. Black Tuesday alone, the stock market lost $14 billion. The week of October 28th, so that whole week, the stock market lost $30 billion. That's 10 times the U.S. federal budget. Now, That was also more money than was spent on World War One. That 30 billion is roughly equivalent to $380 billion in today's money. And from 1930 to 1935, 750,000 farms went bankrupt and were seized by the banks. Some more statistics for you. Unemployment jumped from 3% in 1929 to 25% in 1933. The gross national product of 1929 was 103 billion. By 1933, 4 years later, it was 55 billion. Other statistics that went up included the suicide rates, the divorce rates, and the birth rate went down. Now, some causes of the Great Depression included this worldwide depression that had already started, mainly in Europe, the crisis in the farming sector, buying on credit, hyperinflated the market, and an unequal distribution of wealth as well, all contributed to the beginning of the worst economic depression in U.S. history. All right, that is it for notes for today. What you're going to do now is the Great Depression image search. It is posted on Classroom. I'll see you all next time, everyone. Bye.